Good afternoon, everyone. To all our friends and colleagues who are viewing us from Singapore, from Jakarta, from Kuala Lumpur, and other places in Southeast Asia and beyond, welcome. Welcome to this afternoon's joint webinar organized by RSIS and the AHA Center. Today's seminar is themed Humanitarian Assistance in Southeast Asia during COVID-19. This is the sixth time that the HADR team at the NTS Center here in RSIS has organized an event to mark the World Humanitarian Day. However, with the exceptional circumstances that we find ourselves in this year, organizing a physical event is really not quite possible. So we are very glad to be able to host this webinar. At the same time, it has actually given us an opportunity to host a joint webinar with our colleagues from the AHA Center in Indonesia. So right at the outset, I would like to thank my dear friend, Adelina Kamal, who is the Executive Director of the AHA Center, for agreeing to also moderate today's discussion. Just a few words about why we are organizing something on World Humanitarian Day. As you all know, the World Humanitarian Day marks the anniversary of the 2003 bombing of the UN headquarters in Baghdad, Iraq, where 22 humanitarian workers were killed, including the UNSG Special Envoy Sergio Vieira de Mello. Ever since, the date is now an opportunity to pay respect to all humanitarian workers around the globe, as well as to strengthen the understanding of and respect for international humanitarian law. Every day, humanitarian aid workers help millions of people around the world, regardless of who they are and where they are. Such efforts, therefore, cannot go unrecognized by the rest of the international community. We must honor those who helped the victims of conflicts and disasters. And this year's theme, Real Life Heroes, focuses on what drives humanitarians to continue to save and protect lives despite conflict, insecurity, lack of access, and multiple risks linked to COVID-19. COVID-19, as we all know, is a humanitarian crisis like no other. It has been described as a humanitarian, existential threat to humanity. As the world grapples with COVID-19, the Southeast Asian region remains highly vulnerable also to transboundary disasters. With the advent of the monsoon season, the overlapping effects of a pandemic and a natural disaster could only compound socioeconomic vulnerabilities and affect the way humanitarian assistance is carried out, both in terms of who will provide the assistance and where the assistance is sourced during this period of disruption. This webinar, therefore, will aim to generate this conversation on how the region is coping with the dual challenges of a pandemic and the threat of natural hazards, while also preparing for simultaneous disasters in the future. So this webinar will aim to address the following questions. First, what are some of the challenges faced by the humanitarian sector during COVID-19? Secondly, what are some potential solutions and initiatives to help alleviate these challenges? Last but not least, how can we strengthen partnership to facilitate these new modalities? To this end, we are very, very pleased to have with us three esteemed speakers to come and to share about what it means to conduct humanitarian aid during this new normal. We're particularly very pleased to have with us Dr. Jamil Mahmoud, who is a big name in the humanitarian community. So I look forward to the sharing of personal experiences from the field as we continue this effort to acknowledge and embrace the complex challenges faced by the humanitarian workers and salute the excellent work that they do to provide assistance to those who need it most. So now I would like to call on my dear friend, Adelina Kamal, Executive Director of the AHA Center, to now begin her moderating the session. Adelina, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Mali and our RSIS colleagues for inviting the AHA Center to co-organize the webinar today with you. Since 2015, every 19th of August, the AHA Center, together with the ASEAN colleagues and many of you, always gather in Singapore to participate in the ASEAN Strategic Policy Dialogue on Disaster Management that we organize every year together with the government of Singapore and ASEAN Secretariat. And it's also an opportunity to commemorate the World Humanitarian Day, the ASEAN way. But this year we cannot do it, but I'm glad that we are able to gather here in today's webinar to commemorate this special day together with our friends and partners from the region. I'd like to inform you that we have over 100 people registered in this webinar, and many have expressed interest to have the recorded session. So thank you, all of you, for joining our event today. Now let me introduce our three speakers coming from the government, the civil society, and the academia. First speaker, Tan Sri Dr. Jamil Mahmoud, currently Special Advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia. She's probably the most well-rounded, world-known humanitarian figure I've ever known. She's not only humanitarian, by the way, but also a health practitioner, having policy background in leadership position as well as field experience. Having worked these different sectors, civil society, the UN, academia, Red Cross, and now government. Have I forgotten any? So it's very complete, and not only that, in national, regional, and international settings. Recipient of the ISA to Humanity, the 2019 ASEAN Prize, and a truly real-life hero. Thank you for joining us, sister. Now, the second speaker, Mr. Masahiro Ishizeki, Masasang, Head of International Programs at Mercy Relief Singapore, responsible for overseeing overall implementation of disaster response and recovery programs across 9 countries and have been involved in high-profile international response, such as the tsunami and earthquake in Aceh. Masasang, we have actually something in common. Both the AHA Center and Mercy Relief are the recipient Asian of the Year Award by the Straits Times Singapore in 2018. So glad to have you share the screen together with the AHA Center today. And thank you, the ED of Mercy Relief, also for joining us, Carol Lee. Third speaker, Dr. Al Cook, we call you Al, Coordinator of the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Program and Senior Fellow at the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies of RSIS Singapore. We've been together, starting in 2015 when RSIS helped ASEAN in coming up with the Vision 2025 on disaster management. And since then, RSIS, Dr. Al, Professor Mali have helped ASEAN in organizing the annual policy dialogue. And in recent years, Dr. Al has also been a contributor to the ASEAN Risk Monitor or ARMOR publication of the AHA Center. Gentlemen, much has been said in other webinars about challenges in providing and delivering humanitarian assistance during COVID-19. Many of those webinars concluded with the need more local action and national leadership, to utilize technology to provide remote support, to focus more on filling the gaps of local responders rather than parachuting assistance. However, I think only this webinar where we focus the discussion on our region, Southeast Asian region. So I would like to quote what Prime Minister Lee of Singapore said 2 years ago when ASEAN celebrated our 50th anniversary, that the ASEAN region will become the world's fourth largest economy by 2030. And that's 10 years from now. However, if you look at the risk landscape of our region, we are the home to the world-class catastrophic disaster. It's $1 trillion multi-hazard landscape. And according to our recent study and publication, the ASEAN Risk Monitor, our region's capital stock exposure to disaster is 4 times bigger than our combined economy. And that is problematic because if it continues to happen, it will undermine our growth to become one of the leading in the world. Now, given the COVID-19, the challenge doubles. And given the climate change, it triples. Our region, however, is also unique because it is the region where we see increasing capacity of national governments to lead in response, increasing preference for local and national response supported by regional mechanisms like ASEAN, a region with abundant knowledge and home to both global champion and regional champion for disaster risk reduction. A thriving community where everybody, including us in AHA Center, believe a global leader on disaster management by the year 2025. So given the above context, let's ask these 3 questions to our speakers. What are the challenges that the humanitarian community, the humanitarian sector in the ASEAN region face during the COVID-19? Are there any potential solution or innovation? And what partnership can be forged to address these challenges? So I'll start with Dr. Jemilah. Bu, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adelina. I don't need the slides yet. First of all, let me wish everyone a happy World Humanitarian Day, and for all of us to also remember those who have fallen and those who have been injured on the course of duty. And very delighted to be here. Now, your questions. I think first of all, we have to realize that the impact of COVID-19 is not just on health systems, and it's on the entire spectrum of health, economy, social systems. And ASEAN region is doing quite well in comparison to many other regions. But of course, you know, the protracted nature of the COVID-19 crisis is going to, you know, see us through some very, very difficult times. I think one of the things we have to remember is that ASEAN, as you mentioned earlier, is a very disaster-prone region, but also has pockets of conflict. And I'm very concerned that COVID-19 may have distracted us from the risks of, you know, climate change, the hydrometeorological disasters that will hit us and are already happening in the region. And of course, you know, some of the protracted conflict going on in some parts of ASEAN. So I think we've got to make sure that we don't lose sight of those things which are quite critically important for us to resolve. And COVID-19 should not be an excuse for us not to keep our eye on the ball. And of course, the most vulnerable people are sometimes the people we don't see or we don't even pay enough attention to, especially in COVID-19. We have the issue of refugees and migrants who are extremely vulnerable, but at a time of a health crisis, when health security becomes a very important factor for many governments, that we see a strong swing towards, you know, much more nationalism, and this might create a very toxic narrative that we have to try to avoid. Also, you know, one of the things we keep repeating is you don't have health security until you have everyone having the same opportunities to health. So, you know, no one is safe till everyone is safe. So I think we've got to have that attitude and the compassion and so on and so forth. The other thing, of course, is you have colliding risks, right? You have the risk of, you know, COVID-19 plus, as I mentioned earlier, the risk of disasters, the risk of conflict, and how is it in those regions that have conflict, will they have access to healthcare? access to all the, preventive measures and testing and so forth. So the long dialogue that we've had over many years around the humanitarian development nexus, how we're going to look at sustainable development goals. I think we're going through a little bit of a litmus test here to see how we really turn that into, something that is actually actionable. One of the biggest challenges, of course, is that, I don't even want to talk about international action, because I think that the international organizations have now been forced to look at localization, not because they want it, but because access has been near impossible or difficult. And also international donors are also, now prioritizing funding COVID-related programs at the risk of, deprioritizing others. And I think this is a huge challenge for the international sector that we have to keep an eye on as well. Now, for ASEAN in particular, I think what has happened is, as a collective, ASEAN has individually, countries have done well, right? So you've got Vietnam who's done well, Malaysia to an extent, you've got Thailand doing very well. So you've got these really good examples, but a few maybe having more challenges. But as a collective, ASEAN hasn't been able to come together and maybe move and distance itself from the operational reality and really think more strategically about how, number one, it should have anticipated better a pandemic. We all knew this was a question of when and not a question of if. We've had pandemic preparedness before. We should have a better approach to actually a collective approach to the situation. And using the tools we already have in the disaster management toolkit is not very different in terms of, communication and so on and so forth. Because COVID-19 is very unique in that it is a crisis that requires a whole of society approach, not just the government, not just international actors, not just humanitarian sector. It's about citizens playing their very important role in the prevention of spread of the disease. Now, maybe one of the things that we have to think about is financing. And I think that, if ASEAN is supposed to step up and be really a leader in this area, we've also got to look at much more sustainable financing for humanitarian or development activities in the region, not just funded by external parties, but each ASEAN member state actually committing to ensuring that this is truly a resilient society, not just in terms of disaster risk reduction, but also financially resilient and sustainable. So as we look at localization, which is part of the dialogue now, we now see that it is happening because people, have access, who are at grassroots, who are maybe, limited by movement control orders and so on and so forth. So I speak for Malaysia in this aspect. When I returned, one of the things we said that if we are going to have an all of society approach, then we have to bring all of society on board. And we have established something called, can we have the slide? The Malaysian Coordination and Action Hub, because coordination truly saves lives, as Ocha puts it, right? So what we're trying to do is really have a hub where all the parties, government, private sector, civil society, which includes grassroots organizations, Red Crescent, the NGOs, and private sector coming together and becoming a really independent entity bound by humanitarian principles and ethics and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And you can look at these slides in your free time. So what we are looking now is that, it has to be a little bit of a win-win-win situation, right? That it's about managing a crisis much better as we have this unique moment in history. COVID has provided us to actually operationalize this. How does coordination and collaboration become promoted? How do you have much more supply-demand matching? And how do we use technology to drive action? And really, leveraging on the strengths of each component, whether it's government, civil society, or the private sector to contribute to this. Now, what we then did, which was interesting, is that we built a private-public partnership model, and we're talking about partnership. I think it's really important, and it's got components. For example, a technology platform built by private sector, the private sector coming together to seeing what resources are required, what expertise they have, and then the government providing data and access and so on and so forth, and civil society, the hands and feet on the ground. So I think it's really bringing all of this together. In the next slide, we have a clear vision. Next one, yeah. So you can see all the actors there, private sector, you know, civil society and government. Next, please. And we have a clear vision that we will use this opportunity to build this platform for future crises. And these are anchored on global humanitarian principles and good governance. And I think this is replicable. It can be taken up by different countries in ASEAN, and then we can have an inter-regional sort of collaboration. Next one, please. So I think the next bit is the leveraging technology. So we've seen, for example, in Malaysia, we had a homegrown tracing mechanism using applications and so on and so forth. You know, even financial incentives are loaded onto the platform to incentivize public to use tracing approaches and so forth. But I'll talk about this digital platform that we built for this match. And that is really to also promote transparency. It's the previous slide, yeah. Promote transparency is also to bring speed to action, to coordinate where the cash will go, some common nomenclature, because this is a big problem. The private sector, civil society and government don't speak the same language, and then trying to bring some common speak to that. And then of course, you know, building in standards. The long-term ambition is that this becomes a capacity development hub. It also becomes a standard setting hub that we can then set for our country or the region. And this cloud platform that was built by BCG has become really very useful for us. We can capture so much data on what civil society is contributing, that, you know, at the end of the crisis, the government can say, well, this is how much private sector contributed, this is how much civil society contributed, here's what government contributed. We as Malaysia have come together to address COVID-19. I think it's very important. It's a trust building tool as well. Then the more transparent information you are, the better. Next, please. Yeah, then this is just to show you some of the data we captured, even in terms of resources and donations. So then civil society organizations also can be transparent about how they use their funding. Next. And just to say that this is a live platform that, you know, we can go in and actually look at which are the target communities you're looking at, how many people are being served, where are the gaps, where are there 5 NGOs when there should be only 3, and another area where there's no NGOs when there at least should be 1. Where has the government been very active and therefore may not require so much civil society voice and so forth. And of course, the important thing is enabling resources, advocacy, informing policy, future policy, and so forth. But I want to stress the last point, and that is capacity development. You can't talk about localization without investment in capacities, but also ensuring standards are met and ethics are met and principles are not broken. So this is where we have managed to convene and build this platform so that even the funding comes local. So you can't talk about localization without also pushing for localization of funding. So I'll pause there, Adelina, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to contribute.
Thank you very much, Ibu Jemilah. And congratulations for setting up this innovative platform. I love the idea that it is not only using technology, but in terms of innovative approach as well and the processes. And perhaps we can talk about it later on how to replicate this in other parts of the region. And it's a PPP, not only civil society, but also government and the private sector. Love the idea. Okay, I'm sure that there will be questions on that from the audience. Now we'll shift to Masasang. Over to you. Perhaps you can highlight your own challenges in delivering humanitarian assistance on the ground with the COVID-19, and perhaps also some thoughts on that. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, my name is Masahiro, working for Masahiro Singapore. Today, I'd like to share our learning and challenge under the COVID-19. We cannot go out of Singapore, and also even some countries, the NGO in the town that couldn't go into the field. So I hope that my sharing could give some hint to your operation, to whom we should work with, and then also how to respond, means the partner, and then also where is the really the most vulnerable people, and then also how to maintain a sort of accountability under the COVID-19. So far, we have done some the COVID-19 response at several countries in Asia. Could you bring the PowerPoint slide? Okay, go to the next one. Yes, this one is a map. So far that we have done some countries, and today I'd like to share the case from India, Nepal, and Indonesia. I'd like to show the video from Indonesia first. Would you play the video?
Gue lagi masak kan hujan gede, terus nggak guru teh kan cair, terus pendapur teh ngejeblak terus air pokok jeruk tengah ima, terus keluar kan lompatan kan ke atas, terus tepan bencana kayu itu kan arunya gitu, punya kayu cair kan dengan ka lemur baik pokok nama. Tapi alhamdulillah orang ai jalma mah kitunya selamat lah. Cuma tina harta-harta.
Kalau untuk COVID-19 itu sebetulnya kami sangat khawatir, tapi kami tidak akan takut dengan COVID. Kalau untuk keluarga, ada sebagian yang masih tetap di rumah dan ada juga yang beraktivitas keluar. Tetap kami akan semangat untuk berjuang demi memperjuangkan seperti akan mewujudkan rumah tumbuh itu.
Ya, saya akan sampaikan juga dalam kesempatan ini bukan wastafel saja ya. Saya banyak membantu terhadap warga yang terdampak banjir bandang ini di Kampung Sepang. Alhamdulillah dari wastafel, artinya sekarang masyarakat Kampung Sepang ini yang kena banjir bandang ini mudah-mudahan terkait dengan COVID-19, mudah-mudahan dengan adanya wastafel ini risiko akan berkurang tentang corona tersebut.
Terima kasih ACT.
Kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada ACT dan Militaries.
Terima kasih Militaries.
Mudah-mudahan ini banyak manfaat kepada masyarakat kami. Terima kasih, merci Larry.
Hi. Okay. So can you go to the next slide? So far, we have done in the 3 countries, and also the local is the Singapore one. Today, I'd like to share the one by one, but I get more focus on why we select to work with that organization and how to identify the beneficiaries. Okay, would you go to the next one? This one is the Nepal one. That we work with one national NGO, Lumanti, because they have strong network in urban poor communities. The urban poor community means some are the migrant from the rural area, and then also some are, or the most of them, are the low caste or the outcast people. So that's why even before the COVID-19, they are very, how can I say, vulnerable already. And then the second punch is the COVID-19. Why we work with them? Because they have a good contact with urban poor community through the women's microcredit activities. And also we have a working experience with them during the Nepal earthquake. And also they have resource. They have a good contact with the local government, civil society. Really, they are the counterpart is a very rooted in the community and civil society. So even if we cannot, the Masahiro could not of course, we could not support forever, but they could manage and continue support in their own way for the time being. Considering the COVID-19's impact, pandemic impact, we couldn't fix it. We couldn't see when the exit come. Okay, please go to the next slide. Yes, this one is an Indonesian case that I showed the video. We work with the ACT. It's a big national NGOs. Why we work with them? Because they have a strong network across the nation. And also that they are supported by local communities in Indonesia. That's the reason why we work with them. And then we support these kind of things. Okay, please go. Okay, and then the beneficiaries at the beginning of this year, I hope you know that the Jakarta and suburb are heavily affected by flood and landslide, and also the mudslides. The beneficiaries are the flood victim or the landslide victim in Bogor district. Okay, we should go to the next one. Next one is India. We work with the local NGO. They are very, how can I say, the Assam-based NGO. We know who they are, and then also they have a good contact with the local communities. And our target was the tribal people along the river, so that they are most vulnerable because of the social status. And then also every year their community was hit by big flood. Those are the COVID-19 relief until now. But we have some other plans. We will start soon another COVID relief aid in Indonesia that we will distribute some the food ration to the handicapped people in the East Java, and then also the Sarawak Bos in the Sulawesi, South Sulawesi area. Okay, okay. And then also in Bangladesh, we also have a plan to provide the selected PPE because more than 100 medical doctors passed away because of COVID-19. Okay, next slide, please. Our ED Carol will explain our local engagement.
Thank you, Masa. So at the beginning of the COVID-19, the Mercy Relief Team actually took a step back and we started to ask ourselves, having set up in Singapore, we are a Singaporean charity providing humanitarian aid in ASEAN, but we were asking ourselves, what can we do also for our local Singaporeans? And the team actually got together and we started to reach out to various social service agencies and to seek their understanding what kind of needs they have, and we started to step in as well to provide relief aid for them. So in the case of SOS, it is a charity providing emotional support for people facing a crisis. They could call the hotline. So we started to approach SOS and we spoke to the team and understood that the corporate volunteers, a lot of their volunteers and their staff have pulled out, the volunteers have pulled out, and they were in critical need to manage the helpline. So Mercy Relief staff actually stepped in, and it is still ongoing today. Every Friday we go in to manage the hotline for them. And also, we also understand from Food from the Heart, and this charity actually distributes food to underprivileged families. And again, they rely very heavily on corporate volunteers. And we stepped in during the circuit breaker to provide essential ration packing for them. And we also realized that the families do not only need food, they need cleaning essentials. So we reached out to our donors and we donated essentials to 300 families. And at the same time, our corporate volunteers were actually calling us, and they said that they could produce face shields using 3D printers at home. So they approached us and they asked us, do you need them? So we said yes, of course. And this time around, we distributed to our heroes of this crisis, our healthcare workers in Expo in Alexandra Hospital. So, and also a doctor actually approached us and said that our Ministry of Health, the National University Health System, the SingHealth, which is actually essentially our healthcare groups, and another charity. They started to do education to our migrant workers who are living in the dormitories. So the migrant workers, most of them, they speak various languages in India, so like Bengali and so on, and they were having, they did not really understand what was happening. So we started making, delivering all the healthcare educational posters and booklets in their language to educate them. So the team actually stepped up, and then they moved on to, we moved across all the, most of the migrant workers' dormitories, our community care facilities, and so on, and various hospitals to deliver all these educational booklets and posters and to educate our migrant workers as well. So this is above and beyond what the international team is doing and overseas response. So these are what our contributions back to the Singaporean team in the Singaporean communities in Singapore. Yeah, can I have the next slide, please? So what are some of our learning during this COVID situation? It will be more of like, how do we manage? You know, we tell ourselves that, you know, as much as we want to travel to the various countries to look after the beneficiaries, to provide humanitarian aid to them, we can't. So one of the things is like, how then can we be accountable to our donors, our various stakeholders? And of course, one of which is also the logistics operations. How do we monitor the various relief aid given? And the team has been tapping a lot on technology. We have been asking our various stakeholders, how do we use, you know, AI and various AR and the blockchain, different operations, and how do we monitor and, you know, be operational ready in this COVID situation. And we hope together, like what Masahiro said, today is World Humanitarian Day. They are real life heroes, and we want to be together to stay united, and then we can overcome this COVID situation together. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol and Masasang, for sharing the initiatives of Mercy Relief. It's interesting that we have gone through a rethinking process, just like anyone else, including the AHA Center, and also now providing assistance inside Singapore. Now we shift to Dr. Al Cook. You and Chris have written recently about the humanitarian corridors, right? Basically trying to expand the humanitarian logistic in terms of COVID. Can you tell us more about it, and perhaps the role of academia? Over to you.
Thank you, Adelina, and I wish everyone a happy World Humanitarian Day, and to also recognise those that continue to provide assistance to those most in need and those who have lost their lives. I'm going to speak briefly on this, so please can I have the first slide? Just in terms of the trends that we're seeing in the region, many of these have already been mentioned by Dr. Mahmoud, but I think there are two here that I would want to zoom in on, no pun intended. And that is one, that the compounded vulnerabilities that some communities are facing. We've heard about the refugees and migrant communities which are facing increased restrictions, but also we've seen an exponential increase in gender-based violence. And that ranges from 70% to over 600% across the world during the pandemic. And this is something that has been a long-standing issue, and it's worth reiterating here that many of these humanitarian challenges that we're seeing have really been brought to the fore by the pandemic and were pre-existing. So they're not new challenges that we're facing, but they have been become more explicit. And in addition to the one-stop shop model we've heard that's in place in Malaysia, we've seen one in the Philippines as well, which has developed a one-stop shop model since Super Typhoon Haiyan. And that has been stood up in the recent cyclone Vongfong. And the point to draw out here is that the challenge that we'll face in responding to natural hazards under COVID circumstances are how are we going to provide humanitarian assistance within social distancing measures. So this is something that we will need to be thinking about as we prepare for when those next natural hazards occur. And we've also seen within the region a number of the lockdown measures that have been instituted by national governments, which have had disproportional effects on different communities. Now, a further challenge that we've seen here is over supply chains. And as Adelina mentioned, we've recently been looking at humanitarian lanes. As countries have begun to open up, what we have essentially seen is that it's been focused on essential business travel. And perhaps the humanitarian challenges that we're going to face in natural disasters are not taking the place in those discussions that they should. So in terms of opening up the international community to be able to support the local leadership through regional mechanisms and through national platforms. So there are a couple of considerations I'd just like to touch on here in terms of where do we go from here. Next slide, please. And it's really to reiterate the importance of the humanitarian imperative to make sure that the people most in need are getting access to the relief that they require. And to ensure within our regional community, we've often talked about a people-centered ASEAN community, and to make sure that that discussion is really focused around people again, and that we open up that discussion around those measures of cooperation that we should be taking. Now, in terms of how we go about doing this, we need to be looking at longer term engagement across the different stakeholder communities. So we need to be moving forward to a more preparedness plus focus, so that when we're looking at some of these potential hazards, and we know they're coming, that are we having that real-time and early engagement to see how we're going to undertake humanitarian response in the constraints that COVID is facing us with. And as we've heard in the Malaysia example, I think it's important as well to look across the ASEAN community, because we have varying levels of response and effectiveness at the national level and different mechanisms. And it's to really encourage and make sure that we look beyond a whole of government approach and to include a whole of society approach, so that we're using not only private sector and civil society, but engaging with the humanitarians in countries where at present we don't have those mechanisms in place to facilitate those conversations. And the idea with the humanitarian lanes is to be able to link the national one-stop shops with the international humanitarian community, which is supported by ASEAN mechanisms here. And in terms of what we've seen over the past couple of years in terms of building up capacity within our region, one of the challenges has been in terms of knowledge management and transfer. How do we learn and improve on the last response that we delivered from the previous disaster? And so there's a real need to be actively engaging with groups like academia to provide that support and that reflective element of these responses, to capture the lessons learned when often we have the people who are engaged in direct humanitarian assistance are moving from one crisis to another, and the academic community is there and able to support the operational element and provide that reflective and feed into the strategic thinking on how we go about making our response more effective and ensuring that those most in need receive the assistance they deserve. So with that, I will end my brief intervention here. So and I pass back to Adelina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al. It seems like your idea and Dr. Jim's idea perhaps can be twinned together, the one-stop shop and the humanitarian lane. But let's talk about it. Now I would like to invite some questions. I have now one from our longtime friend, Oliver Lacey Hall from the United Kingdom. Malaysian match initiative looks very interesting as a practical way to operationalize localization. So this is the question for Dr. Jemilah. Dr. Jim, it will be useful to get your perspective on how the various actors brought together in Malaysia to form that match, and as well as any ideas that you may have on whether match technology and tools could be adopted at the regional
Yep.
level.
So first of all,
to my question again.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think, first of all, let's acknowledge that the humanitarian world is fairly small and everybody kind of knows everybody, right? At a local level, especially at a national level, you kind of know who the players are. You have the Red Cross or the Red Crescent as a statutory body. You've got NGOs, you have the private sector and so forth. Now, when COVID was, really picking up in the country, we saw the flurry of activity on social media, on different platforms, people really going out to help. It was not just well-organized NGOs or civil society, it was generally people, communities as well. The private sector, wanting to buy ventilators and all that. And a sense that, coordination could be much better than what it is because everyone was busy. So it was just a few of us, like-minded individuals, who really wanted to use that opportunity to make localization real. That came together and they said, "How about we do this?" And I think part of the just stroke of good luck, I happened to be in Malaysia and then appointed to support the Prime Minister. It was an opportunity for me to inject this idea, and of course, the government was very open to ensuring that the most important outcome is having that shared outcome and that shared vision that the outcome must be a safer country at the end of it and that all of us will be protected. So having a clear vision and outcome is very important, bringing people, convening. We never met face-to-face, everything through Zoom, through Microsoft Teams, and then, getting some anchor organizations. I think this is key. You have to have anchor individuals and anchor organizations. So we were very lucky that Boston Consulting Group came up to us and said they wanted to build a platform for Malaysian Red Crescent. And I said, why Malaysian Red Crescent? Let's build it for the whole country. And Malaysian Red Crescent were very gracious and said, yes, it's a good idea. So then bringing the private sector, the GLCs in Malaysia, the government-led corporations, later more of the other corporations, bringing other NGOs, forming cluster and assigning leadership to different actors in each of the different clusters and really allowing them then to build a network of networks. So it's really about a distributed network and bringing people in and not, creating such rigid structures that everyone would feel there's 100 meetings to go to. But the important thing is the transparency. I think when you show each other to really, that we are going to be transparent and show what everyone is doing, acknowledging everyone's contribution, then that becomes important. But also sending a very clear message that this is not a one-off COVID-19 exercise. If we are going to strengthen localization and strengthen local actors, then we need to build in systems for capacity development that's strategic, but also looking at how do we then build good standards. What are standards and perhaps a certification process or something in the future, but certainly looking at that. Now, I think that it's very important that the academia plays a role, and this is where we haven't brought the academia in yet. We should, because one of the biggest and most important roles of academia is to speak the truth, to really, study systems, study processes, and say that, this works or this doesn't work based on evidence and science and data. And I think this is what's required. I think finally, what I want to say is that I would warn and caution all NGOs that the old model is probably dead. This old model of going and flying around, putting banners up and showing that you're doing work. No, I think communities are smarter than that. I am allergic to the word beneficiaries because it's a power dynamic that is unhealthy, but it's about talking about people, about communities and people who also are strong enough to be able to determine what is good for them. Sometimes a lot of assumptions are made by NGOs or governments or the UN or whoever that, oh, we need to give them this, rather than saying, you know what, they can actually sort this out. We have to ask them what they need so that they find solutions themselves. And I think cash programming has really transformed that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jemilah. This is the year where we need to change the way we do things, and we have to make make it sure that we focus on the people, on the need of the people. It is no more the trend for parachuting international assistance. It is the time for us to actually support the local responders. Loud and clear. Perhaps Dr. Al, could you connect or could you kindly connect your idea, Humanitarian Lane, with this one-stop idea from Dr. Jemilah? Because the Humanitarian Lane is built on the premise that you are still moving international assistance to a country. Over to you, Dr. Al.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the idea of the humanitarian lane is when countries are facing an extreme disaster and when they don't have the availability of resources to them, as we go into perhaps a super typhoon hits an exposed country, they will need to source goods from outside the locality. And that may be within the country, it may be beyond the country, depending on what the need is. So this is an effort to overcome that. And what we've seen outside this region in the Pacific is that there were a lot of necessary goods, albeit in those small island states, where quarantine was really delayed. And we know that the first 2 days is absolutely essential to get the supplies that you need. So it's all about facilitating the necessary relief supplies that the community needs when we're looking at natural disasters, when perhaps those local supplies are not available. And so it's to ensure that we're recalibrating the response and making sure that it's not excluded in that sense. And I think going back to the one-stop shop model, it does already engage the international community in Malaysia. So we just need to think, I think, about that in other parts of the region.
Adelina,
Okay.
may I add to that?
Yeah.
I think this is where anticipation and preparedness is key. I think that, you know, if we always said a pandemic would be a matter of when and not if. We know that the impact of climate change and the, you know, climate risks are so high that, you know, if we had kept that in mind constantly, then AHA or ASEAN can play a very, very important role. You don't need the idea of humanitarian lanes and corridors is not a new one. This has been thought about even in previous crises where, for example, access is difficult and so forth, right? But ASEAN can play such an important role in the preparedness, in the anticipation, but and also in jointly advocating. Let me give you one example. We have a vaccine that is going to be coming up now, right? And there's already a lot of lobbying of the vaccine companies to procure. Now, ASEAN as a regional entity could be on block advocating and procuring vaccines for the region, not just for individual countries. Because if you have a 600 million population in ASEAN, your buying power is quite powerful in terms of procurement. And then the health diplomacy kicks in, because this is all about, you know, relationships and about, you know, building those partnerships with vaccine producers and so on and so forth. So I think we've got to think much broader, and we have to have a systems approach rather than organization approach to trying to solve problems of the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim. Actually, there is one question, and perhaps the other speakers can also respond to this. And the question is from Anna Ansari. This change the nature of emergency preparedness and international and local dynamic of humanitarian action in the future. So we're talking about the change landscape. This COVID-19 may not be the first international catastrophic event that we will face. How can we better prepare? Anyone of you, Dr. Al, Dr. Jemilah, Masasang, would like to answer to that question?
I think I did earlier by saying that anticipation is going to be key, and that, you know, preparedness is going to be key, and therefore an investment in capacity development of local actors. When I say local actors, it's not just NGOs and civil society, it's also businesses, also government, right? To be able to understand what are standards, what are principles, what are humanitarian law, and so on and so forth. So the question is spot on, that we have more risk from climate and other risks coming, our way.
Yeah.
I think if I can just
Thank you,
add,
Dr. Jim. Dr. Al?
Yeah, just on this point, I think what's important is that we've been quite good at cooperating between capitals within the region. But if we look at the subnational level, there needs to be a lot more engagement with local government or provincial governments in these areas, and to work with those as well as the other stakeholders. So perhaps this is something that can be really worked on as we go forward in that preparedness for future disasters.
Okay, Masasang, you would like to add on that?
Yes, just two things. The localization is very important. I agree, I fully agree. But we need to think about who is local. The national NGO, local, so they call local NGO, the community. I think better to think about it. And then also the network is important. Through the network, we can support during the peacetime, localization and capacity building. Yes, that's all.
Okay, thank you for that. There is one more question. It's quite interesting. Dr. Jim, you mentioned that you have yet to include the academia in your platform. But then there is this question, how can academia find a way to contribute real time alongside the operational partners? You said that you can be critical, you should be critical, and that their views are but how you actually work differently for the academia alongside our operational partners, because we do it very fast. I want to respond to that.
Al, I think.
Sure, I can respond to it. Yeah, so just in terms of what we've been doing, we've trained with you, through ERAT. So both in terms of observing how it works in real time and also having some of the team trained to become the qualified ERAT member. So I think it is important to make sure that the community is broader and that we see, some of those operational constraints in real time, in practice, but also allow us to go home and reflect on what we think is going right and going wrong, so that we don't become part of some sort of groupthink. So we have a critical role, and as long as we're allowed to be reflective, I think we can contribute in that way.
Any other response to that? How the academia can contribute real time? Well, one of the things will be through the deployment of ERAT. We have in AHA Center ASEAN Emergency Response. But then during COVID-19, we made them across the border. So then we'll have to rely on the local and national resources. Okay, Dr. Meli, you raise your hand. Over to you. You want to respond to the question on academia?
Yeah, I think we have to be a bit more realistic when we talk about real-time involvement of academia when it comes to real operations, right? Certain actors have specific jobs, but academia can be involved in the different phases. And Dr. Jemilah talked about preparedness, right? One of the important things about preparedness is be prepared for what? So there are many mechanisms, for example, early warning systems where we in the academe, because what we do is we cover a range of issues, we look at all trends. That's the role we can contribute, right? Preparing some ideas and flagging some risks which we think are imminent. Just like in conflict, early warning mechanisms is real. But when it comes to real time, going with, because sometimes my point is you could get in the way of real actors on the ground when it comes to operations. So I just want to put it out there. You are Dr. Jim and the others. You're all right in the field. So unless you're part of the whole mission, that's another thing, right? But I think we can also contribute better really when it comes to preparedness, because that is something that came out quite sharply in light of COVID-19. We were prepared up to a certain point, but dealing with a pandemic on the long haul, that is really where the problems came about. And because the systems, health infrastructure, were not as strong as we expected them to be. So I would think that that will be a more important role for the academia.
Thank you very much. Dr. Jim, you need to leave, I know, but perhaps some final thoughts from you before you join the Prime Minister.
No, really, first of all, Prof. Meli, I take your point, but I think academia has to also start changing. You know, more and more we're seeing that, you know, many universities and academic institutions want to be much more hands-on and real in managing knowledge. I think it's very valuable to have academic experts, particularly those who, you know, are able to ask very critical questions, study ongoing real life, because real-time evaluations go on all the time. Right now, they're provided by some entities or companies or, you know, organizations that do evaluations. But academia can do that because you can bring a very different nuance, completely different perspective to looking at things because of the way academics think. So I wouldn't completely, you know, say that academia doesn't have a role in active real-time evaluation. I think it does. And, you know, we can carry on this discussion. But my final thing, Adelina, and then ask really, I think what we've done with Match is something new and has the potential to be replicated and improved. You know, it's new, it's going to learn, and it's going to get better. It would be fantastic for ASEAN, and I'm very happy, you know, if you want to convene the missions in Jakarta or whatever, that we tell them about what we've done, that they might want to be inspired and take some of the learning from there to their own countries. The other thing I would say is BCG is a global company. They did this for us pro bono, and this platform can be taken, the same design, you can take it, it's not ours, it's for humanity. So, you know, I just want to say, reach out to me if you need to get more information, but I'm also now offering that we will be happy to brief anyone in more detail about what the platform is. So thank you so much for having me today, and I have to run.
Thank you very much for your time. We cannot have you, you know, longer than usual, but we really appreciate your time, and we wish you all the best in your efforts to fight COVID-19 in your country. Thank you. Good to see you again. So now we are back with our conversation with the other speakers. I know that the time is up, and we have actually quite a number of questions. One is about the role of military, both at the regional level as well as beyond ASEAN. And then the second one, I think, is from Anna from UNHCR. I have yet to read the question, but can I ask our co-convener, RSIS, is to entertain this question? How much time do we have? How long can we extend this conversation, or we wrap it up for now? Can I ask Prof. Meli? Perhaps we give another 10 minutes, 5 minutes to answer some of this question, and then another 5 minutes.
Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, Adelina, that would be good. Yeah.
Okay, so let's try to see these questions from Charlie about the role of militaries. Very interesting, in HADR mission. Now that we are restricted to travel, what would be the role of at the regional level as well as beyond? We have the ADMM Plus, as you know, ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, and +8, and this is the 10 countries +8. But then beyond that, we also have ASEAN Regional Forum that have actually worked well together in terms of exercises. Now, in view of all these changing humanitarian landscape? How are they going to contribute? Any takers for that? Al or Masasang or Prof. Melly?
And then maybe I'll take on the question. So as the NGO for providing humanitarian aid, I think we do have various actors that work with us and various stakeholders, one of which would be our military. And I think our wonderful partners from China RSIS, they are here in this forum. So how do we work with them in this COVID-19 pandemic? We do receive various reports on what is happening in the world and how do we respond, and how do we work together? Mercy Relief, we are on the ground within 72 hours in the aftermath of a disaster. Of course, now we can't, and we have to use technology again on how do we tap on technology to provide all this relief. And at the same time, I do agree that we need the academics, we need the research when we build back better for the communities. So we also work with RSIS, with Dr. L, and we will tap on their their research and so on. And all this actually provide the humanitarian help that we do in terms of COVID-19 and beyond, and pre-COVID-19 as well. Yeah.
Al, would you like to respond?
Sure. I think
Any thought?
Directly on this issue, I think it goes back to preparedness, right? And working together ahead of time to see who is doing what, where, when, and how, the usual issues that we see in response. So it's better building those relationships, and we've had exercise coordinated response, and there are a number of other avenues where we've seen these exercises with civil and military partners engaging to see how we can figure out what those niche capacities are. So whether it is the surge capacity to deliver needed goods in a crisis, we need time and we need preparation to test out these coordinated responses for these humanitarian efforts. So I think it feeds back into the need for longer term engagement between the different actors and finding, whether they are civilian, military, NGO, etc., a way in which to bring them together so that they can better prepare for future events.
Okay, thank you. I would like to move on with another question, and this is in relation to the role of academics. The potential use of technology in collecting evidence for analytical purposes, bringing a new way of doing things, and also brought to realization there are no more geographical borders. Reskilling, rethinking will have lasting effect, but this crisis is not just a turning point, but marks a significant shift in our mode of operation, both in research and in teaching. That is from Caroline Brassard from a comment. But I think this is important as well, because then when we talk about humanitarian assistance, it's also about advocacy, it's also about outreach. And that's also the role of the academics and the teachers around us. Perhaps this is also important way of communicating, with the future, the young generation on how things change, and we should actually change the way we do things and deliver things. Any thoughts on that? Perhaps Al and Professor Melly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with many of the things that have been said. My point earlier was that there are different phases where academia can and has been involved in terms of, in terms of either giving ideas, being able to provide the kind of more objective thinking, being able to suss out the nuances. I think it's all good. And I also acknowledge the need for, thinking out of the box. And I think what we are doing in in cooperating and working already with AHA Center, Adelina. I think we're already starting to do that. The fact that many of the activities that we're doing in RSIS, in the center, is very much attuned to the current activities that you're doing also. So I can see a very good synergy between what academia and universities and the practitioners, academia and practitioners are actually doing. And that is actually quite new if I compare it to maybe 5-6 years ago. We were quite disconnected. So I would, in fact, since we are on this platform, it's really a very good opportunity that the AHA Center and of course the ASEAN Secretariat has given us to be involved in our own way. Carolyn's point about using the use of technology to collect evidence, yes, because in this new in this current circumstances that we find ourselves in, technology is our default mode of operating, right? Because we cannot really be come face to face, but also we can share a lot of information through the use of technology, so I think it's all good. What is coming out in the conversations that I've heard is that, while everybody is adjusting to the kind of challenges that we now face, which is really quite daunting to some, I would also say that we have actually been quite creative. I mean, I would have thought that the world would have stopped since borders have been closed and there's a lot of social distancing. But that doesn't actually stop many of us to come together, to exchange views, and to follow each other's activities and developments. And this is one good example, this joint webinar that the RSIS NTS Center is doing with AHA Center. So everyone has a role. My only point that I said earlier, sometimes it's also an issue of subsidiarity. You're there, and specific skills are needed, and those that have the skills really should take the lead, right? So I would thought I'd leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time for us to conclude, but can I ask Masasang and Carolee if you have anything to add before we close? No? Masasang, anything from you?
Nothing special, but I'd like to add that the IT is important, of course. Because of the IT, we can have a remote operation. But first of all, the very important thing is rapport with partner and rapport with grant people. Based on that, we can use IT technology and others here.
Thank you very much for all the thoughts and the comments. It seems that we don't have, perhaps we should next time extend to another half an hour. But let's conclude for today's the discussion, and I'll try to do that in just a few minutes. First of all, we like the idea of the multi-sectoral approach presented by Dr. Jemilah. The Kita Match that has been initiated is a PPP initiative involving various sectors in Malaysia, and something that perhaps can be offered to other ASEAN countries and linked to the regional platform like ASEAN and AHA Center. Second, we learned about operationalizing local leadership through capacity building, making sure that we have the networks beforehand, like what Mercy Relief did. We built the network and then enhance the network. So when there is a need to mobilize a system, that we can utilize that network. But at the same time, through the approach presented by Dr. Jemilah, we can actually also not only strengthen national and local leadership, the multi-sector collaboration, but also ensure accountability as well as maintaining standards of our response. We talk a lot about the role of academia, and it's very interesting on how academia can play a real-time role together with the operational partners like Mercy Relief, like AHA Center, and so on and so forth. And one thing for sure is in the preparedness level in early warning, for early action. You have contributed to our ASEAN Risk Monitor report, the yearly publication where AHA Center share the situation of the risk in our region and what can be done together, along with articles from various partners. So that can be done, early action and preparedness, the studies to indicate the risk. But also for real-time evaluation, as we do our response, provide us with some feedback on how we do things better. And that probably is something that can be inserted into the new platform presented by Dr. Jemilah. And of course, in terms of learning, in terms of capturing the lessons learned, in terms of educating for the future generation, in terms of pushing us, the operational partners, to step back and then see and reflect whether we do things correctly. We also talk about the need for us to change the way we do things, to rethink. We learn from Mercy Relief how they do the rethinking process. They used to provide assistance outside Singapore, but now they're also addressing the most vulnerable inside Singapore. And that's actually a reality of today, that organizations will see the need to transform the way we do things. And that is also applicable for everyone, including AHA Center. We cannot just act like the hero. We talk about real life hero here, but we cannot act like a Superman or superhero anymore, because the superhero and the Superman are responders on the ground, the local responders on the ground. And what the question at the end of the day, what can we do together to help them in the preparedness level, in their capacity building, and in making sure that assistance can reach to the targeted audience the fastest and the best way they can. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, RSIS, for organizing this webinar, the first ever webinar organized by the AHA Center. Thank you, Mercy Relief, Dr. Al, and Dr. Jemilah Mahmoud, who's not with us right now, but I'll convey that thanks to her. And thank you, everyone, the audience. I apologize for not being able to entertain all of your questions, but if you have any, you can address it later. Perhaps RS, you have some announcement. I think we're going to have these recorded sessions later on available. And let us know if you have questions. You can send additional questions to us through the RSIS. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.